Perhaps you remember the look of a floor just after it had been properly swept, when the light from a window found every board and made the whole room seem to breathe out. Perhaps you remember the smell as well, a little coal dust, a little soap, a little fresh air coming through a door held open with a boot or a brick. There is something about an ordinary cleaning day that stays in the mind, not because it was grand, but because it belonged so completely to home. Tonight, let us step into one of those homes and into the long, skilled rhythm of sweeping day before vacuum cleaners ever began their steady hum. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into everyday history, please like the video and subscribe, only if it feels right to you. And if you would like to, leave me a comment telling me where you are listening from, and what sort of broom or brush you remember seeing in your own childhood home, or the home of a mother, grandmother, or aunt. Then let that thought carry you gently onward, because once you begin remembering an old room being put to rights, a great deal of life comes quietly in behind it. So settle in now, and let the shape of a familiar room rise up if it wishes to. A kitchen floor, a narrow passage, a square of rag rug near the hearth, the small homely dignity of a house being cared for with steady hands. What did sweeping day really feel like in a working Victorian home, when dust had to be chased out by hand and effort? How did a woman move through rooms that were used hard, lived in fully, and expected to be made fresh again before the day was done? What sounds filled the house as ashes were lifted, brushes worked over boards, and rugs were shaken in the yard? What little habits, tricks, and economies made all that work possible? And how much of it, in one form or another, still feels familiar to you now? Come with me, then, to an English working home in the 1880s on an ordinary weekday morning, while the town is waking and the first duties of the house are already underway. You can step in quietly, as if you belong there, and in a sense you do, because homes have always known the language of being put in order. The day begins before the sweeping does. That is one of the first things to understand. A Victorian working woman does not wake thinking only of floors. The house is a whole little world, and each task leans against another. Before the broom has touched the boards, there is the fire to stir, the range to coax, the kettle to set on, and often breakfast to prepare for those who must be out early. Sweeping day may sound like a single job, but in truth it is threaded through every other duty, woven into the ordinary cloth of keeping a household alive and respectable. You enter the house by the back if there is one, or by a door opening straight into the kitchen if space is tighter, and already the room tells you much about the family. This is not a place arranged for display, it is arranged for use. The kitchen is warmest, busiest, most often occupied, and in many working homes it serves as living room, workroom, dining room, and heart of the house all at once. The table may be scrubbed white in places and dark in others, where years of use have settled into the grain. A few chairs stand near it, never as many as one imagines a family ought to need, because children perch, visitors manage, and people make do. Crockery sits on a shelf or in a simple dresser. A clock ticks. A cat, if the household is lucky enough to have one, has already found the best patch of warmth and sees no reason to help with the sweeping in any practical sense. The floor beneath you might be stone in one house, brick in another, but often in a late Victorian working home it is plain wood boards, sometimes covered in part by strips of carpet or small rugs where feet most often travel. Wall-to-wall fitted carpeting is more the territory of better-off homes and front parlours than of these hard-working rooms. Here, things are chosen because they can be used, moved, mended, beaten, scrubbed, and used again. A rug is not decoration in the modern showroom sense. It is comfort underfoot, help against drafts, and another item that will one day have to be lugged outside and persuaded to release the dust it has quietly gathered. The woman of the house, whether you imagine her as wife, mother, widow, daughter, or some combination of duties too complicated for a census line to capture, has learned by necessity how to read dirt the way a gardener reads weather. She knows where soot settles fastest, where damp leaves marks, where muddy boots come in, where the children drop crumbs without noticing, and which corner behind the door somehow catches every wandering scrap in the room. Dust, in a coal-heated, candle-lit, gas-lit world, is not a minor inconvenience. It is part of the atmosphere of living. Coal smoke drifts through towns and cities, finds its way indoors, settles on ledges and curtains and floorboards. Ash from the hearth makes its own soft grey contribution. Fibres from clothes, straw from doormats, crumbs, street dirt, cinders, and the powdery remains of yesterday all gather together until the broom is called for. And the broom itself deserves a moment of attention, because before machines arrived to swallow dust by electric power, the broom was no humble afterthought. It was a proper tool, known by feel and use. In Britain, household brooms and brushes came in many forms. There were birch brooms for rougher work and yard sweeping, stiffer bass brooms, hand brushes, hearth brushes, and long-handled indoor brooms suited to boards and flags. Materials varied, as did quality. Some were bought ready-made, some from local shops, and some in poorer or rural settings might be improvised or repaired. A good broom mattered, so did keeping it from wearing out too quickly, because replacement cost money, and money in a working home was expected to perform several miracles before the week was over. You can almost hear the beginning of the morning. The grate is being cleared. That comes first in cooler weather, and much of the year in Britain there is cooler weather enough to make the fire central to domestic life. The ashes from the previous day must be removed carefully. There is a metal shovel, perhaps an ash pan, perhaps a bucket. The fine ash rises at the least disturbance, drifting upward with an innocence that hides its determination to land somewhere inconvenient. A woman learns to move slowly at this stage, to lift rather than toss, to keep from filling the room with what she is trying to remove. Even so, some of it escapes. Of course it does. Dust was very good at insisting on its rights. Once the hearth is tidied and the fire made up again, breakfast may be given or nearly so. Men and older boys who work outside the home often leave early. Children may be fed and sent to school if they are of age, or still be underfoot if they are not. A baby might be on one arm, while the other hand tends the kettle. In a family where the mother takes in washing, sewing, chairing, or lodgers, the morning is even fuller. So sweeping day, contrary to any tidy illustration in a book, is not an isolated little ritual carried out in lovely silence. It happens among footsteps, voices, porridge, boots, requests, missing buttons, and the eternal question of where on earth that other stocking has got to. If you like, you may let your eyes grow heavy here and simply listen to the house moving around you. The story does not need anything from you except your company. Once the earliest rush has passed, the proper cleaning can begin. In homes with several rooms, there is often an order to the work, and much depends on how many spaces can be set aside while others are cleaned. A very small house offers fewer choices. In a 2-up, 2-down terrace, for example, each room has to do more than one job, and there is not much empty air in which to hide clutter. Furniture must be shifted a little or worked around. A chair is moved and put back, a footstool lifted, a rag rug rolled. Bedding might be turned or windows opened if weather allows. If there is a tiny front room kept a little nicer than the kitchen, that room may be cleaned less roughly, more carefully, perhaps saved for a particular day, because the front room, even in modest homes, often carries family pride. But the kitchen is where you begin to understand sweeping as a whole practice. The ashes and loose bits near the hearth are gathered first with brush and shovel. Then the larger broom takes over. There is a technique to it, and one can almost see it in the wrists and shoulders. This is not random flinging. The broom is drawn in steady strokes that bring dust inward from corners and under edges. The person sweeping knows how to angle the broom to catch grit without merely stirring it up and relocating it for later. She works from the edges toward the center or from the far side of the room back toward the door, depending on the shape of the space. It is ordinary skill, and because it is ordinary, history books have not always been very respectful of it. Yet anyone who has ever tried to clean thoroughly with a poor brush and a tired back knows there is knowledge in these movements. Victorian household advice books, even when written for middling homes, often carried brisk confidence about order, regularity, and cleanliness. But working women managed such ideals according to means, time, and strength. They adapted. They knew which recommendations were sensible and which belonged to households with more servants, more money, and fewer muddy boots. A manual might suggest frequent attention to every corner, proper ventilation, regular beating of carpets, careful dusting of furniture, and immediate disposal of refuse. All very well. The woman in a small terrace with 3 children, a husband on shift work, and a wash to finish before noon would have nodded politely at the general principle and then got on with reality. The boards under the broom are often bare and practical. In some homes they may have been scrubbed as well as swept, though scrubbing was its own heavier labour, often done on hands and knees with water, soap and brush, and requiring time for drying. Sweeping, by contrast, was more frequent, a necessary measure against the constant return of dirt. There may be floor coverings cut to fit around furniture, or old carpet pieces laid where they protect the boards from wear. Such pieces are picked up and shaken if possible. Outside they go, over a line or rail or the backyard wall, and then comes that unmistakable rhythm of dust being beaten out. If you have ever heard a rug being thumped in a yard, you know the sound is wonderfully final. It is the sound of a woman refusing to negotiate further with yesterday. In the Victorian street it would not be unusual. From one backyard to another, from one washhouse line to the next, similar domestic noises travel through the air. A carpet beater, where available, gives a hard, flat slap. A stick may do the same work well enough. Dust comes out in pale clouds, and one steps aside if one has sense. The family cat, if present, finds this all very unnecessary and may retreat with grave insult. Many urban working homes in late 19th century Britain had tiny yards or shared outdoor spaces. These back areas were practical places, lined with coal sheds, privies, washing lines, bins, perhaps a copper for laundry if the household was fortunate, or access to one nearby. Sweeping day does not stop at the back door. Dirt is transferred, shaken, sorted, sent outward. The whole business of cleanliness depends on movement between inside and out. Windows are opened where they can be. Fresh air is welcomed, though in industrial towns it arrives carrying a rather mixed character, part blessing, part smoke from everyone else's fires. Inside, dusting and sweeping are companions. It would be little use to sweep the floor, only to leave the mantel and shelf edges furred with soot and fluff. Yet dusting, too, can send particles drifting down again, so there is a practical sequence. A cloth, perhaps old linen or worn cotton, repurposed from a garment beyond decent mending, moves over surfaces. The black lead on the stove may need refreshing on another day, or perhaps today if there is time and energy. Grates and ironwork in Victorian homes were often kept bright with blacking, a messy but satisfying business that gave the fire surround a cared-for look. Brass, if any is present, might be polished. Doorknobs, fender edges, candlesticks, and the small metal details of household life can absorb astonishing amounts of female labour over the course of a year. The more you look, the more you see that sweeping day is not about one object meeting one floor. It is about the whole ecology of the room. Every textile catches dust, every open fire produces residue, every person entering from outside carries the street in on soles and hems. Children sit on the floor, crawl on it, drop crusts on it, and sometimes go to sleep against a chair leg while the work goes on around them. Men come in from factories, workshops, docks, yards, building sites or stables carrying traces of labour on their clothes. A home cannot stay untouched any more than a shoreline can stay dry. Upstairs, where there are stairs to go up at all, the work changes slightly. Bedrooms in working homes are often small and plain, but they ask for just as much care. Beds may be aired, bedclothes pulled back, windows opened for a short while if weather and security permit, chamber pots emptied and rinsed where that remains part of the household routine. Dust lies on washstands, bed rails, chair backs and sills. The floor may be bare boards with a little bedside rug, perhaps a patchwork of old material, perhaps something once better and now demoted from downstairs. Sweeping here is often quieter. There is less ash perhaps, but fluff and lint gather in a very determined way under bedsteads. Dust has always loved the place under the bed. It is one of its oldest addresses. You can picture the broom passing under the iron bed frame, bringing out lost pins, perhaps a child's wooden toy, a button, a dried leaf, a marble, a hair ribbon thought gone forever. Every home has these small archaeological finds. In that sense, sweeping is a little like reading a family diary written in crumbs and thread. It tells you who has been there, how they move, what they carry, what they drop, what they forget. A mother would not describe it in such grand terms. She would simply say, with practical satisfaction, that she had a good lot from under the bed today. Bedrooms also reveal the economy of cloth in a Victorian home. Bedding was aired and mended because replacing it was costly. Sheets were precious, blankets were patched. Quilts, coverlets, bolster cases, and curtains all gathered dust and absorbed the scents of the house: soap, skin, lamp smoke, coal, damp weather, lavender if one could manage it, starch if ironing had been done recently. The cleaner the room, the more these scents resolved into something fresh and homely rather than stale. It is not the same fresh smell sold in a bottle now. It is sharper, more truthful, made of wood, air, soap, and effort. In a better room, perhaps the front parlour if the family has one, sweeping may be done with a certain caution and ceremony. Not because the room is sacred exactly, but because it is often reserved, kept best, and used less. Here may be the family photographs, perhaps framed portraits or carte de visite on the mantel, a Bible, ornaments under glass domes if fortune and taste allow, a sofa with antimacassars, and chairs that are not for climbing on with sticky hands. The floor may hold a more important piece of carpet. Dust settles there too, of course. Dust is democratically minded, but because the room is less used, it can preserve an air of order if maintained. To the woman of the house, that room can represent aspiration, respectability, and her ability to present her household well, even if the kitchen tells the truer story of daily life. Respectability in the Victorian working world is a word that carried weight. It did not simply mean having money. Many did not. It meant trying, managing, appearing decent, keeping children clean enough for school or chapel, keeping the doorstep swept, the bedding aired, the pots washed, the family turned out in tolerable order. Neighbours saw one another's standards, landladies saw them, visitors saw them, so did one's own conscience. A woman might be poor and still fiercely proud of a clean hearth and a swept threshold. To modern ears this can sound severe, but there was warmth in it too. Keeping a home in order was a way of shaping dignity out of constraint. It was not abstract virtue, it was daily, visible, practical care. The doorstep itself is worth pausing over. How many old photographs and recollections mention it? The front step swept, sometimes scrubbed, sometimes whitened with stone if local custom and means supported it, often serving as the tiny stage on which a household presented itself to the street. In close urban rows, women might be seen out early with broom in hand, clearing away yesterday's soot and bits of litter. This was not glamorous work, but there was companionship in these thresholds. A few words exchanged, news shared, children called back from wandering too far, delivery boys passing, milk brought, coal ordered. The morning widened through doorways. If your thoughts are drifting softly now, that is quite all right. You can stay in this street as long as you like, listening to brushes on stone and the faint movement of a town beginning its day. A working woman's cleaning routine also depends on water, and water in the Victorian period was not the obedient thing it is for many of us now. Indoor plumbing improved during the century, but access varied greatly by region, by town, and by household means. Many homes still relied on pumps, taps in yards, shared water sources, or carrying water where it was needed. Every bucket lifted had weight in it, not only physically but in planning. If a floor was to be scrubbed, if cloths were to be rinsed, if dust was to be damped down, if children were to be washed, if dinner was to be made, then each use of water had to be thought through. One does not splash casually when every kettle and pail has had a journey. That practical intelligence appears everywhere in the home. Cloths are saved from old garments. Newspapers, if available, are used for lighting fires, wrapping, lining, or covering. Soap is cut carefully. Ash may be useful in some tasks. Stale bread is transformed into puddings or crumbs. Bones flavour broth. The same economy governs cleaning. You use what you have, you repurpose. You prolong the life of the broom by not grinding it useless against rough stone when a different brush will do better. You save the better cloth for finer surfaces and keep the more ragged one for grimier work. Nothing is only itself. Everything may yet become something useful. Children in such homes are not always absent from sweeping day. Indeed, they may be conscripted into it in ways small and large. A little girl may shake a mat too tiny to be troublesome, fetch pegs, hold a dustpan, fold cloths, mind the baby for 10 minutes, or be told to stand out of the way, and then, inevitably, drift back into the middle of everything. Older children may carry coal, wipe skirting boards, clean boots, or run errands. Boys and girls alike could be given chores, though the gendered pattern of domestic expectation was certainly strong, especially for girls who watched and learned from their mothers. In that observation lay training. Long before a daughter kept her own home, she had absorbed the sequence of tasks, the signs of what needed doing, the standards expected, and the bodily memory of how to do them. There is a tenderness hidden in that transmission of knowledge, not sentimental tenderness perhaps, but practical affection. A mother says, "Do it this way, the dust will not fly so much. Shake the cloth outside first. Sweep toward yourself, not across. Mind the ashes. Move the chair before you begin, or you will only have to go round it twice." These are small instructions, but they are also inheritance. A modern person might call them life skills. A Victorian mother would probably just call them sense. And of course there is mending, always near at hand. While a room airs after sweeping, while a kettle sings, while a child naps, a stocking may be darned, a seam gone over, a cuff turned, a button sewn back. In many homes there was no strict separation between cleaning time and sewing time, cooking time and childcare time. One task ebbed while another advanced. Domestic labour was less like a row of boxes to be ticked, and more like keeping several plates spinning, except the plates were also the dinner service and could not be dropped. Clothing itself brought dirt into the house in recognisable ways. Heavy skirts brushed streets, aprons protected dresses but had to be washed. Men's work clothes carried dust, grease, fibres, metal shavings, clay, or soot depending on occupation. Children's knees announced every outdoor adventure. Laundry and sweeping were close cousins in the family of endless tasks, and many households developed regular rhythms to keep some control over the tide. Wash day, ironing day, baking day, cleaning day, mending in between, though in truth, every day contains some of each. The old saying about housework never being done did not begin with electric appliances. If anything, those women would have regarded modern claims of busyness with a raised eyebrow and perhaps a kind but devastating silence. Still, it would be wrong to imagine only drudgery. Work did not banish warmth from these homes. On the contrary, much of the comfort was built through the work itself. A swept kitchen floor feels different underfoot. A bed aired in cool daylight invites better sleep. A polished grate catches firelight in a pleasing way. Fresh curtains at a window soften a room. A clean table means a family can gather to eat with a sense, however brief, that things are in hand. This satisfaction mattered. It is one reason memories of household labor often come wrapped in feeling. You remember not just that the floor was swept, but that afterwards the room seemed calmer. Imagine the noon light now, moving a little higher, finding boards recently brushed. Dinner, meaning the midday meal in many working households, may be in preparation. If there is stew or broth, it might already be underway. If there is bread and cheese, cold meat, potatoes, dripping, or pie from leftovers, it may be set out more simply. The sweeper works around this. Domestic tasks do not politely pause for one another. Flour falls while dust is being conquered. Boots return just after the doorstep is done. Someone spills tea, someone asks where his scarf is, someone tracks in cinders with astonishing speed. The housewife restores order with the patient realism of one who never expected victory to last forever. There is humour in that, a very old domestic humour. Not the loud kind, just the dry little smile of a woman who has watched a newly cleaned patch of floor receive muddy footprints within minutes, and has chosen, for the sake of peace, not to collapse theatrically onto the nearest chair, though she may have wanted to. Every century has known that feeling. By the late 19th century, middle-class homes increasingly employed more specialized cleaning equipment, and, where means allowed, servants to do much of the heavier daily work. But for working-class women, labor-saving devices remained limited, and hiring help was not the norm. There might be neighborly assistance in special circumstances, family support, older daughters helping, or occasional charring work done from house to house by women who themselves returned home to their own chores. Yet the basic burden of daily domestic order remained close to the hands of the woman running the household. Her expertise was practical, embodied, and rarely celebrated in formal history. But you can recover it by attending to rooms like this one. The evidence is in the marks of use, the arrangement of furniture, the wear on cloth, the timing of tasks, and the memory of how a broom sounds on old boards. Sweeping day also reveals something about health and changing ideas of cleanliness in the Victorian era. Across the 19th century, public discussion of sanitation, ventilation, cleanliness, and household management grew significantly, especially in towns and cities facing overcrowding and pollution. Germ theory developed later in the century, but before that, many people already connected foul air, dirt, and disorder with illness in various ways. Advice about opening windows, airing bedding, removing refuse, and keeping living spaces clean became more common. Working families might not speak in medical language, yet they often understood in practical terms that a stale, dirty, ill-kept room was not good for anyone. Fresh air and cleanliness were part of sensible housekeeping where circumstances allowed. At the same time, one must remember limits. Some houses were damp because the building was damp. Some rooms were crowded because families were crowded. Some soot settled because the whole district burned coal. A woman could sweep beautifully and still fight a losing battle against structural conditions beyond her control. But even there, care made a visible difference. A cloth on a table, a hearth swept, a child's face washed. A room aired after breakfast. Such acts did not solve every problem, but they shaped daily life in meaningful ways. The materials of the home had their own personalities. Linoleum, for instance, began to appear more widely in the later 19th century, though not in every working home at once. Where it was used, it offered a somewhat easier-to-clean surface than bare boards in some rooms, and by the late Victorian era it was becoming more familiar. But many households continued with older surfaces and mixed arrangements. Oilcloth and painted floor cloths could also be found. These coverings mattered because they represented both practicality and aspiration, a step toward cleanliness and neatness that did not require a grand house. To us, a bit of worn lino may sound unromantic. In its day, it could be a very welcome improvement, easier to wipe, less splintery, and rather smart if still new. Furniture in a working home tends toward the movable and the useful, though even useful things can be loved. A chest of drawers polished by years of hands, a chair reseated with rush or patched cane, a cradle handed down, a shelf made by a husband or brother. The act of sweeping around these things is part of how they remain members of the household rather than merely objects. They are attended to, dust removed, their places maintained. Many women knew the slight lift required to move a particular chair without scraping the boards, the way to fold the rug so it could be shaken more easily, the safest place to set the hearth brush where no child would tread on it. Housekeeping was intimate knowledge of things. And then there were smells, which tell as much history as sights. The smell of blacklead, a little metallic and sharp, soft soap, damp wool drying, bread crusts warming at the fire, coal smoke clinging to curtains, carbolic in some households later on, scrubbed wood, wet stone, a bunch of dried herbs hung somewhere if one had them. In summer, perhaps the sweet dusty scent of a room open to the yard. In winter, the warm, close smell of everyone gathered in the kitchen while the wind fussed outside. After sweeping and airing, these smells arranged themselves differently. They did not disappear into some impossible purity. They simply settled into a cleaner order. If you are listening in bed now, perhaps half dreaming, you can let yourself drift through those smells and sounds as though passing room to room. The broom is moving somewhere below, steady and unhurried. The kettle lid trembles softly. A cloth snaps once in the yard. Nothing urgent is required. It is tempting in modern life to imagine the past either as picturesque or as relentlessly grim. Ordinary domestic history asks us to be gentler and more truthful than that. A Victorian working home could be cramped, tiring, noisy, and physically demanding to maintain. It could also be full of humour, tenderness, pride, thrift, routine, and immense competence. Sweeping day sits right in the middle of that truth. It was work, it was repetitive, it was necessary, and it was one of the ways a woman created a livable world for the people she loved and managed. Season altered everything. In wet weather, dirt arrived in thickened form, clinging to boots and hems. In dry weather, dust rose more easily and travelled farther. Winter brought ash, damp, and the endless significance of the fire. Summer allowed more airing, more open windows, more outdoor shaking and drying. Spring cleaning, in the fuller sense, could be a much more formidable enterprise, involving washing walls, taking down curtains, turning out drawers, beating mattresses, scrubbing, whitening, and a general household upheaval that made ordinary sweeping day look almost modest. But ordinary sweeping was the maintenance between larger campaigns. It was the daily or near-daily act that kept chaos from settling in permanently. The social life of the neighbourhood brushed against these routines constantly. A neighbour might knock and borrow tea, sugar, or a flat iron. A child might be sent next door with a message. News travelled over fences and through back passages. Women doing similar work in adjacent homes formed a quiet network of observation and assistance. One might mind another's child for a few minutes, lend a brush, recommend a cheaper coal merchant, or mention that rain was coming and rugs had best be brought in. This was not a sentimental sisterhood untouched by quarrels. Neighbours could be trying, curious, and occasionally alarming. Yet the shared grammar of housework created recognition. Each knew the weight of water, the speed of soot, the indignity of smoke blowing back down the chimney, the triumph of a floor finally done. Even sound has a map in such homes. The scrape of chair legs, the whisk of broom straw, the thud of a rug against a line, the ring of a poker against the grate, footsteps on stairs, the rattle of crockery on a dresser shelf when the back door shuts sharply, a baby fussing, then soothed, someone singing under her breath, not for performance but because songs often accompany repetitive work. Perhaps a hymn fragment, perhaps a music hall tune, softened by habit. Perhaps no song at all, only that peculiar domestic silence that is not really silence, just the companionship of familiar sounds. Light, too, should be noticed. Gas lighting had spread in many urban areas by the late Victorian period, but daylight remained the best ally of cleaning. Dust reveals itself in slanting morning sun with a kind of merciless honesty. A woman might prefer to sweep certain rooms while the light was good. In winter, short days pressed everything closer. In summer, evening could still be bright enough for extra tasks. Curtains, if any, were often practical things, moved aside to let in more light. The very act of opening a window and pulling back fabric has a hopeful quality to it. The room wakes, the house breathes. Many working homes also contained lodgers from time to time, especially where extra income was needed. This could alter the domestic balance considerably. More bedding to air, more meals to juggle, more boots by the door, more dust and use in every room. Yet it also meant more money toward rent or food. The housewife became not just cleaner and cook, but manager of a tiny enterprise. Respectability, privacy, and practicality had to be negotiated around bodies in limited space. Sweeping then was both maintenance and a way of keeping some authority in rooms where space was shared more closely than anyone would ideally choose. We should also remember that not every woman kept house under the same conditions of health or age. Older women moved differently. A pregnant woman paced herself. A woman recovering from illness could not do all she wished. Girls entering service elsewhere might compare the standards of employers' houses to what they had known at home, bringing skills from one setting to another. Widows, sisters, daughters, grandmothers, and aunts all participated in domestic economies. The image of one idealized Victorian housewife is too neat for real life, but the broom still passes through all these variations. It remains one of the great connecting objects of domestic history. There is something very intimate in the way a room looks after being swept and put back together. Furniture returns to place. Rugs lie flat again. The hearth is neat. The table is reset. Perhaps a loaf sits under a cloth. Perhaps potatoes are ready for later. The room is not empty and shining like an advertisement. It is better than that. It is inhabited and cared for. Traces remain. A toy in the corner. A shawl on a peg. Work basket under the chair. But the whole has been gathered together. That is the art. Because so much of women's labour in the past was repetitive, people have sometimes mistaken repetition for insignificance. Yet repetition is exactly how life is sustained. Floors need sweeping more than once in a lifetime. Fires need laying daily. Meals return with astonishing regularity. Stockings wear out again. Buttons come off again. Children outgrow things. Bread goes stale. Sheets need washing. To keep meeting those needs with patience and skill is not lesser history. It is the history nearest the skin. In the Victorian period, class differences in domestic life were real and often stark, but there is also a broad human continuity in the desire for a home that feels decent, orderly enough, and welcoming to one's own people. A duchess and a charwoman might not agree on much, but both could notice whether a room smelled stale, whether ashes had been left untidy, whether clean linen improved sleep, whether a swept floor changed the feeling of a place. The standards, means, and scale differed. The instinct was common. From time to time, technological change knocked softly at the door of this world. Mechanical carpet sweepers did exist in the 19th century, and by the later decades some labor-saving devices were marketed with enthusiasm. But widespread domestic vacuum cleaning belonged largely to the 20th century, and especially to households able to adopt electricity and newer appliances. For the Victorian working home, the soundtrack remained older: brush, broom, cloth, shovel, pail. The body was the motor. The wrist was the switch. The back supplied the power and occasionally lodged a polite complaint. And yet those older methods were not careless or primitive in the dismissive sense. They were adapted to the materials and realities of the time. A long-handled broom worked well on boards. A hearth brush did its proper duty near the fire. Rugs truly did need beating. Ashes truly did need shoveling. There is almost a relief in acknowledging that not every age was trying and failing to become ours. They were doing what fit their homes. If a Victorian woman could hear a modern vacuum roar to life, she might be impressed, though she might also note that it was very noisy and had an alarming appetite for pins. As afternoon approaches, the house often settles into another rhythm. Younger children may nap or grow quieter. Older ones return eventually from school. A husband may come home later, depending on work. The woman who swept in the morning is not resting with folded hands in a sunbeam, much though she may deserve it. There is tea to think of, perhaps errands yet unfinished, perhaps washing to bring in, vegetables to peel, clothes to mend, or work done for pay. But because the main rooms have been put in order, the rest of the day meets a different atmosphere. The house is steadier. Things can happen in their places. This, too, is part of the emotional history of cleaning. Order gives a little mental room. It is not magic, and it cannot solve grief, debt, or worry. But a swept floor and a tidied table can make hardship less shapeless for an hour. They can offer a sense of agency. They can say, quietly, "Here at least is one thing set right." Many women knew that feeling without needing to name it in grand language. If a visitor comes by in the later day, there is less embarrassment. If the vicar, the rent collector, the school attendance officer, a relative, or a neighbour crosses the threshold, the room speaks well enough for the household. Even if clothes are patched and means are slender, cleanliness carries its own testimony. In memoirs and recollections of working-class life, one often finds this pride in scrubbing, whitening, polishing, or sweeping, not because women were foolishly attached to appearances, but because visible care asserted their standards in a world quick to judge them. The body remembers this labour. Arms, shoulders, knees, and hands all take part. Skin roughens, backs tire, aprons collect dust. The hem of a work dress brushes newly disturbed grit. Hands smell of soap, ash, iron, and starch. Nails darken and are cleaned again. At day's end, a woman might wash at the sink or basin and still carry the day in her bones. Yet there is also a bodily pleasure in completion. The last pan put away, the broom stood back in its corner, the ash bucket emptied, the cloths rinsed and hung. That small end point matters. Sometimes there are little embellishments. A bit of newspaper folded neatly in the grate, a sprig of something green in a bottle, a tablecloth spread for Sunday, best china arranged in the front room, however modest, a cushion beaten and plumped. Such touches are easy to laugh at if one has never needed them, but they are often the very signs that a household contains imagination as well as labour. Even a narrow home with limited means can make room for grace. Think for a moment about the floor itself. because the floor receives everyone. It feels every step and catches what falls from every hand. It is where babies are set down, where children play with marbles or wooden blocks, where boots stand drying, where skirts brush, where dropped crumbs wait to be noticed, where one may kneel to black the grate, peel potatoes, or search for a lost thimble. To keep the floor clean enough is to honor the busiest shared surface in the home. Perhaps that is one reason sweeping holds such symbolic power in memory. It is housekeeping at its most visible and most immediate. No two homes were exactly alike. A mining family in the north, a dockside household, a rural labourer's cottage, an urban terrace near mills, a London court dwelling, all would vary in layout, materials, air quality, income and pace. But in each, ordinary cleaning connected domestic effort to the wider world. Industry made soot. Streets made mud, weather made damp, work made wear. The home answered back with brushing, scrubbing, airing, folding and mending. The broom was one of the answers. By evening, if we remain in this little house, the rooms carry the look of having lived through a proper day. The fire burns again. Tea things have been used and perhaps washed up. The children are gathered or nearly so. A lamp may be lit. Shadows move differently now on the swept boards. If there is a rug near the hearth, it looks almost inviting enough to tempt tired feet to rest on it. The woman who did the morning's work may sit for a few moments with sewing in hand, or simply lean back before the next interruption arrives. Her body is tired, yes, but the room gives something back. It encloses the family in order she has made and remade. And perhaps that is why sweeping day before vacuum cleaners still speaks to us. Not because it was quaint, and not because hard work ought to be romanticized, but because it reveals home as a place continuously made by attention. Care was not theoretical. You could hear it in the brush against the boards. You could see it in the cleared hearth and the opened window. You could smell it in the sharper air after dust had been sent outside. You could feel it under your feet. You may notice, as the story slows, that the past has come very near through these simple objects. A broom, a dustpan, a rug over a line, a cloth in warm water, a woman tying on her apron and beginning. No grand event, no famous speech, just a house and the endless miracle of its being kept. When we draw a warm bridge from that Victorian home to our own time, the likenesses are closer than they first appear. We may have vacuum cleaners now, mops with clever handles, washing machines, sprays that promise impossible things, and floors made of materials a Victorian woman would regard with fascinated suspicion. Yet the instinct remains the same. We still open a window to freshen a room. We still feel better when the kitchen is put in order. We still notice how a made bed can steady the morning, how a swept path or cleared table quietly changes the mood of a day. And many of the most loving acts in a home are still nearly invisible. Someone wipes the worktop before anyone else wakes. Someone shakes crumbs from a cloth. Someone folds the washing while listening for a child, a kettle, a husband in the drive, or a friend at the door. Someone remembers where the dust gathers and tends to it before company comes. The tools have changed, and in some ways the work is easier, though never entirely gone. But the old language of domestic care is still spoken fluently in millions of homes. It survives in habits, in standards, in little satisfactions, and in that deep, simple feeling when a room has been set right for the people who live there. So as the house grows quiet again, you can let that Victorian broom rest back in its corner beside the hearth, the day's dust carried out, the boards swept, the rugs shaken, the room made ready for evening. Thank you for spending this gentle time with me, and for bringing your own memories to it. Good night now, and may your sleep be as peaceful as a well-kept room after the day is done.